Hi, good morning. Thanks for coming out so early. My name is John Zimmerman, and I work at the University of Pennsylvania, and I study dead people. Meaning I'm a historian. I'm hardly an expert on this subject that we're discussing today, that is evaluation and surveys of students. But I do recognize the historical importance, and of course I've written about that. But I'm delighted to make the acquaintance of two actual experts in the present, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves briefly.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jillian Kinsey, and I work at Indiana University Center for Post-Secondary Research, which is home to the National Survey of Student Engagement. And I study live students, the ones who, and some faculty who are actually operating in higher education today in lots of different ways. And I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you very much for being here with us this morning. I am not a morning person, so this is a stretch for me as well. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Megan Snow. I'm the Chief Data Officer at AQ. So I study everything, also living, all of our internal data for continuous improvement, as well as our tools and measurements for the impact of the courses on students and institutions.
Great, thank you. So to get the conversation going, I wanted to ask our two experts a basic organizing question, which is, what do they think the most important thing we've learned about this subject is? And what do they think the most important thing we have yet to learn about it is? That is, what do we know? What do we really know? And then, most of all, most important to me, what don't we know that we need to find out?
So for me, I mentioned that I work with the National Survey of Student Engagement. So this is an annual survey project that was initiated because in higher education, if you remember the 90s, for some of you who might remember the 1990s, we actually were at a point of some, I think, real crisis, that there was a lack of knowledge about the quality of college and university experience. And partly it was because there was a strong emphasis on rankings and ratings, and not that that has disappeared at all, but that there was an overemphasis on external measures of rankings, prestige, and measures that really, I'll just say, this is my critique, did not really demonstrate what was happening in colleges and universities or what the impact of college and universities were, but they were measures of library resources and research dollars, and those were being used as proxies to estimate the value of colleges. So when an organization and a project like NESE came on board, it was to really bring students' perspectives into the quality conversation and students' experiences into the quality conversation. So to me, the most important thing that we can continue to do is endeavor to find out what students are experiencing in college and what kinds of practices matter to their educational and their personal success, and then making sure that we hold colleges and universities accountable for those things. So we have a ton of research about what matters to student learning, success, and development, and we need to ask students, to what extent are you being exposed to these things? How much are you doing them? How much are you getting out of them? And really elevate students' knowledge and experiences and voice in measuring those things. Okay, now I said all that, and I know that this group is probably, I hope, that resonates with you. Asking students matters, and that's really, I think, the simple thing that we have learned is the importance of asking students about their experience and asking them reasonable questions about what they are experiencing in college, and then using that information for diagnostic purposes, not punitive purposes on colleges or universities, but for diagnostic purposes to both let institutions know where they stand, and then hopefully, and with guidance and good faculty development and good institutional leadership support, identify where things need to be bolstered and where things need to be changed so that students have more of the enriching practices we know matter for their learning. Okay, so I'm going to tackle one at a time here. So that's what I think we know about surveys and asking students.
So I agree with you. And I think what we maybe can all agree is students need to have a voice and we need to get their perspective and their feedback. And I'll just jump to the second one, which is what I think we don't know is how to do that very well, validly, how to match up the instrument we're using with its intended purpose. And I think for all those practical challenges, that's what's bred some discontent in how student feedback and voice is integrated into faculty conversations, institution feedback conversations. And so if we can separate those two out, that it is inherently a good thing to have students' voice and input out of the practical challenges that we've faced at institutions and at a larger level, and how to use that feedback appropriately and how to capture it effectively. I think that is still some uncharted territory.
I'll just add one thing about I didn't want to leave Megan all the negative part. Yeah, I didn't get to talk about the positive stuff and then not have to identify anything that's problematic. That's probably unfair. But the idea that we need to be better about asking questions that are reasonable for students to answer, that's still an area that we need to work on. We're still, I think, troubled by the fact that we sometimes ask students not only the traditional kind of problematic questions, double-barreled, compounded, confusing questions, students that ask students to compare themselves to other students. I understand there might be some value to that for a different reason, but when you're talking about trying to get students' perceptions about the experience they're having, you're better off asking them questions that they can actually cite and draw up and draw in what they have actually been doing versus having them make a comparison to something. So there are questions and how they're framed that are really important for both student evaluations and for overall student surveys of satisfaction or of the quality of an experience. But we need to be better about asking those questions, and then we need to trust what students say, which to me is still an amazing thing that we are always skeptical, that we come at with skepticism, and we believe that students are not always in the best position to report on their own experience. And to me, that is one that I encounter all the time. So I think that's our problem as faculty and administrators, people working in higher education, that there are times when we are willing to trust students' views, and then there are times when we withdraw that support and trust. And I don't know what makes those contexts different all the time. Sometimes I don't see what the difference is in those two responses. So us trusting things and then making sure that we're asking questions that students can really answer appropriately.
So we're going to, should we take a question or should we? Yeah, please. Sorry, and please.
So the question is how can you really help us here? It sounded like a very important, a very passionate question that you have about making use of students' information and then raising an appropriate level of skepticism about students who are responding to end of semester course evaluations and who those students are and what their data might represent in your use of that information. Okay, so I restated the question for the purposes of this video, and I think we can address that question. I'm willing to, but I'm going to look to Megan to see, do we want to do it now or do we want to do it? Okay, all right, okay, so here's what I'll just say quickly. All right, so it's an excellent question, and it's one that is a reasonable question to ask. There are a couple things that I would say immediately. One is I'll just speak from the survey that I know the most about. So the survey that I operate, that I work with, works at an institution level. So we're asking students about their overall educational experience. So you can have these same questions about who responds to a survey like that. And it tends to be, actually, this is something that most people who do survey work study is who responds and who are your non-responders, and do those populations look different? And oftentimes they do, but in the case of asking students, as long as you're providing students an equal chance to participate and you know that you're inviting all students to respond, there is a general sense that you're going to get both ends of that perspective of students who are unhappy and happy, overgeneralizing and oversimplifying these two ends of the tail. So the idea that you're going to get a good population of students to respond is something you should enter into the experience with, and then you need to sort it out. But here's the hard part of your answer. You're going to get both sides, and sometimes the experiences of students in the same class is going to look vastly different, and there are other good reasons why it looks vastly different, and it's not just about happy and unhappy students. It's about a lot of the things that we talked about yesterday in some of our, I'm trying to think if this was the main session where we all were or in less, that students are experiencing, students have a different experience. There is no average student that you're going to get. There's no such person, place, or thing. There's a range of that, and we have to respect the fact that students within the same course are going to have could have a vastly different experience based on their sense of belonging, their sense of feeling valued in the course, their sense of feeling like their view is going to be taken seriously if they are an underrepresented student. So there are lots of things that are shading that perception. So you just have to be really careful, but I would caution against just eliminating a view because you perceive that you're getting the complainers and that you're not getting feedback. So, okay, that's a really long answer.
Well, I just want to emphasize, thank you. I just want to emphasize two things. One, I think, like you said, if the questions themselves are something you value and they're written well, that's an underlying assumption. So if the questions are asking my faculty member is an expert in the discipline and they're a first year student, probably they don't know if you're an expert in the discipline. They're not an expert in the discipline, but they can report on their experience in the course. And I would say the other thing is, you mentioned perception. You have to accept it's their perception. So you have, maybe implemented strategies to clarify the grading policy, or you have intentionally tried to make connections to their future career. But their perception was they saw no connection to future career. So they're very deeply personal feedback, especially the comments, so like don't maybe read the comments. But if you're looking at the quantitative data, just try to separate. This is for improvement. This is what I was intending to do, and the students did not receive that. And so, what can I do differently next semester? Because your goal is the same. So it's hard to say just depersonalize it because it's very personal, and the way that they're used can be very personal. So I understand that's a very broad statement, but like I said, if the questions are something the students can report on, and it's something that you intend to improve, it is. All perspectives are valuable, whether they were pleased or displeased.
So to continue the discussion and to pick up on what our colleague from Mercy said, I'd like to provide kind of a faculty perspective on this and get the experts to respond, because one of the things I've noticed at this meeting is that there are a lot of really important people around, like deans and CTL leaders. It's kind of intimidating, and I'm just a lowly professor. And because I am a lowly professor, I think maybe I have a little bit more purchase possibly on the common objections that you hear. And I'd like to throw some of them out to our panel and just have them respond. I think the most common one is this is a popularity contest. That this doesn't really measure a teacher's effectiveness. It measures if the students like her or him. And that's not a good measure of how good they are. There is some evidence that the best scores go to people that grade the highest. And so this may also be an engine of grade inflation. I'm sure some of you have seen the research that came out of the Air Force. The Air Force, the military academies are a great source of natural experiments because they require stuff, right, of everything. And it turned out at the Air Force, in math, if you got a low score in one of the intro courses, your students actually did better later on. Yeah, that's right. Because you were holding them to the mark and they didn't like it and they gave you a low mark. But actually they learned more from you. I mean, it's an interesting objection. The other objection has to do with race and especially gender. There is some evidence
that students downgrade people based on those biases because we live in a country that's full of biases. The gender numbers that I've seen are very troubling. You take a guy who's very loud and dramatic and you put him in front of a bunch of students and they say, wow, this guy's awesome. And then you have a woman who behaves exactly the same way, and it's like she's annoying, she's grating. So those strike me as serious, not unanswerable, but serious objections. Then I think there's another objection on the other side, if you will. I'm trying not to politicize this, which could go like this. Jillian said something you hear often: we want these things to be, diagnostic, not punitive. Well, if we really believe in them and we want teaching to be better, maybe they should be punitive. How do you have it both ways? How do you say on the one hand, right, this is a very valid measure and it tells you all sorts of great stuff, really important material stuff about the effectiveness of a teacher, but we're actually not going to use it in hiring and firing them?
Okay, I have one. I'm going to stay away from the punitive measure. I'm still not into that. I'm still sticking with my help people identify what they want to improve, and then help them get the information they need to know about what will help inform that. Okay, but the question I want to take up, the objection I want to take up is more related to what we ask students about, and I just want to say it's very important to capture students' perceptions. Students' perceptions matter. It's a valuable source of the asking students part of this measure or this work. However, I think we have to be careful about what we ask them perceptions of. So if it's a perception of a teacher's expertise, that's not really within their bailiwick. It's not something that they're good judges or evaluators of. But if we ask them about their perception of how much they're working in a class, that actually can be a useful measure. So there are perceptions that they can be asked about their own behavior and also about the environment that is being created in the classroom. That would be a perception question that would be within the realm of their good, solid evidence that they can answer. The other question I would urge people to think about asking is to look at your course evaluation questions or any sort of survey questions you're asking students and think about the number of behavioral questions you're asking. So shifting a question that's more about what are you, student, doing in this course? And then you can infer that the student is doing things in the course because they are being asked they are demanded, or there's an environment created in the course where the student wants to do those things. I've gone the extra mile. I have worked harder than I thought I ever could. I am challenged more than I expected in this course. Those are the kinds of questions that you can then infer it's because of the course or because of the environment that's being created in the first year or in the senior year, whatever level you're trying to better understand in your students, or in the gen ed curriculum, whatever it is, you can ask students those kind of questions about their behaviors and then say, let's look at this faculty member and determine to what extent you have done the things to influence these practices.
So I would love to see the Air Force instrument, because I think they're not one thing. So we're talking about course evaluations like they're one thing, but there can be really terrible course evaluations. I mean, I've seen a lot of them. A product of consensus isn't always a great outcome when everyone has to agree to it. So I think, like you said, what you are asking them makes a massive difference in the value of the data that's going to come out of that. And then I would say, what is it actually measuring? So, we'll share later, we have a logic model, and we are intending for our student survey to measure the faculty members' use of effective teaching practices. And so if those two are not related, if we cannot make a connection between the faculty members' use of effective teaching practices and the students' responses, then we are not effectively measuring what we are intending to measure. And on the point of maybe it should be punitive, I would say, maybe, but what does it predict? If the student's course feedback is predictive of their long-term success, of, it is telling you something meaningful about their learning experience, that they are more likely to be retained if they report more higher ratings of instruction, or they are more likely to graduate on time, then that's meaningful. There's something being captured there that's meaningful. But if they're being asked questions that predict nothing, they are not meaningful. They're asking about, I enjoyed this, I would, recommend it, all kinds of things that you can't place inside of any other predictive model, then no. But I think we can't talk about it like it's one thing, because it's really dependent on the quality of the actual survey instrument. But just having a survey and then talking about how you're going to use it, it depends on the survey. You have to look at the survey really closely.
So maybe this would be a good segue to the exercise.
That's great. So on your tables, and I'm having a weird slide situation up here, so I'm going to work on that. But on your tables, there are a handout. It's a two-sided handout. And one side has some information on the NESI, and one side has some information on the AQ student survey.
All right, so two-sided page. If you're going to have to flip back and forth, and I'm going to recommend that you think about one page being, okay, so we're going to focus on this first. So everybody could focus on this quickly so we can at least see what's on this one. So this comes from the National Survey of Student Engagement, and in 2021, we expanded our effective teaching items. We had a set on effective teaching practices that were proven to be associated with students' success, graduation, retention, what they learn, and it's working very well. And then in 2021, if you want to hit the next advance, we actually added 4 new items because we felt that the emphasis on students actually understanding criteria that were part of assignments, that they had actually engaged in reviewing and summarizing material, that there was a greater emphasis on helping students demonstrate what they learned through quizzes, assignments, and other activities, that there had been a shift in how we think about effective teaching practices. We added 4 other items. So these now 9 items are a measure of effective teaching practice that we asked students to report on as first-year students and seniors. So students are reporting on these not in a course, but as part of their entire experience. Okay, so I just want to introduce that. That is this aspect that they are reporting on. And you can see it in the question. During the current school year, to what extent have your instructors done the following? So this is a perception of what instructors are doing. All right.
And on the other side is the AQ student survey, which is intended to be at the course level, the individual course section level, as formative feedback for the instructor. So when this data is aggregated, it is reported back only to the faculty member. It is sometimes aggregated, but there's no indication of which faculty members participated, or they're never named. So it's not shared back with the institution for other purposes, intended to be formative. AQ's courses in professional learning ask faculty to implement new strategies. So it's really a measure to help them understand, I am trying new things. How are my students perceiving this? What is their reaction to it? Are they recognizing this practice in my course? So it is aligned to our effective practice framework, which is on the slide. And as I mentioned, it fits inside of our logic model where we are engaging faculty in development. Again, that level 3 is using the practices. And so when we look at 4, it is students' reaction to that. Are they receiving it? We do regularly test the instrument for bias. It is free of bias against faculty of color and women. And again, we share it for formative purposes. So the question that we would like you all to engage in at the table are here on the slide. So 2 things. What kind of value can this data bring for decisions at the levels of the course, department, and institution? And what are the limitations of how this kind of data should be used at the levels of the course, department, and institution? And so we'll take about 5 to 10 minutes to have that discussion.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt. We're very curious. We're very curious about these discussions. Maybe somebody could get started. What's the most interesting or challenging or controversial thing that you heard at your tables? Anyone want to start us off? Not everyone at once. Yeah, just hold your fire. Yeah. Please. Yeah. Here comes the mic. Thanks to our friend here.
Oprah moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
And please say who you are.
Gladys Palma, the Shriner Makers. I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief Academic Officer of CUNY's newest college, the School of Labor and Urban Studies.
Wow.
I think what really was instrumental and not controversial, but very important in our conversation was that sometimes the data that we are getting from the student survey really is not so much about the professor or even the course. And we pointed this out. It's probably an assessment issue, that are students ready for the material that they are getting in a particular course? And this is specifically STEM related in many times, because so my colleague was sharing that, she teaches veterinary technology and science. And the assessment person in me, I also, full disclosure, happen to be a middle states evaluator with an assessment background. Ooh. So when she said to me, it's really not fair because the students really are not prepared to think critically and are asked to think critically when and she didn't realize she was disclosing this. I've been doing this for a long time. With her other courses, the sense that I got is the curriculum is not preparing the students to do that level of thinking and understanding in her course. So she gets the criticism, but for me, I said this is an opportunity to use this course to possibly then take a look at the curriculum and what precedes this to prepare students for that course.
Yeah. I just want to affirm the excellence of your response, which is about what the data might suggest is necessary to examine. And I think that is a really excellent point about what data from students can help you identify. Is there seems to be a disconnect here between what the students know coming in and what this particular course or program is asking them to do. So I think you've just exposed one of the most important things of gathering information from students is it can help a faculty member, maybe aided by someone who actually understands something about assessment and learning, to come together and say, what's going on here? There's a disconnect.
I would only add, and I'm not going to ask you to answer this, but if that space exists on your campus. So is there the space on campus for this to happen where faculty members might present questions, they have the opportunity to speak with administrators, it's a thinking session together about what we might be learning from this, and it is not, you get your results personally, you deal with them personally, you look at them personally, but what structures are in place to ensure that kind of good work about how to use the data effectively is actually going to be able to happen?
Yeah. Other issues or questions that came up at your tables? Things. Yes, in the back. Thank you. And please let us know who you are.
Hi, I'm Edith Aguirre from El Paso Community College, and we were talking about having, as faculty, more specific questions and maybe assessed right before an exam or right after an exam, so that we get feedback immediately and we can maybe change the course as we go. Like, do students like our skeletal notes? Are we engaging you? Yes, no. And so those types of questions we would like to have, because I think these were sort of done at the end of the semester. That was one of our questions. When are these assessments done, and when do faculty or administrators get the results?
Excellent point. Now, if I had my druthers, I would say you should be asking students all the time, and exactly what you described, of asking them one question before an exam about their own preparation. How much did you prepare for this? And then after the question, how much did your preparation influence your performance on this? There could be some excellent questions to pair around a challenging assignment that might give you insight as an instructor, and perhaps the students some insights about their own preparation. So there's great timing for things like that. And then there's also really important timing for end of semester, when the student is in a reflective moment and needs to evaluate their whole experience. So there are different reasons for different instruments and the timing of different instruments. And I would urge you to be as thoughtful as you are about the assignments you create as how am I going to get students' perspective on their performance or their assignments or how this course is going.
I would only add, we haven't heard this much, a little bit, but about response rates. That usually comes up when we're talking about student feedback, low response rates. And I think what you're saying is getting their feedback all along the way, acting on it, responding to it. So they see if you're going to make a change. Oh, I heard you all wanted this. We can make that change. Or I heard you want this. That's not a change we can make. And here's the reason why. But that you have read it, your process. And then when it comes to the end of the semester, I'm going to use this tool to reflect on X. That people, anyone, not just a student, anyone is much more likely to provide feedback if they believe it's going to be read and used and acted upon. A random survey that you never hear about ever again, that, is usually less of a motivating prompt to respond.
Hi, my name is Regina Blasberg, and I'm full-time faculty at College of the Canyons in California. I wanted to do a follow-up question on your response, which is my struggle when I ask a student, how much did you prepare and how did it affect your outcome, is I will very often hear, oh my God, I studied for hours and hours and hours. I can't believe I didn't do very well. And now you have to, now I'm like, okay, now I have to figure out how to teach this student how to study on top of I've got a class to teach. So, I sometimes hesitate to ask a question if I feel like I can't do the follow-up that would be required with the answer that I may receive. And so sometimes those things can be a struggle because I hate to ask the question and then leave the student hanging.
Yeah, always a good philosophy that you should only ask questions that you either are that you plan to act on or that you can. So as a general rule, let's just be clear about that. Don't ask them questions that you have no intent of acting on or that you can't. However, I do think that this one is a tricky one, and we don't have time here to address your question thoroughly and adequately. But the idea that you might be identifying a challenge, not necessarily in the students' study habits, but maybe in how I'm not suggesting this is about your course or your program, but how the assignments are scaffolded or the time between what the content is and when the performance aspect is, whether it's an exam or an assignment. So there could be many things that discovery could either help you identify, but I would treat it as, this is interesting. Let me see what I can do as an instructor, not just for that student necessarily, but what might this suggest about the extent to which students are being sufficiently prepared for this particular exam, assignment, project. It's a much larger question than just a study problem with a student. I'll just say that.
So unfortunately, we're at time. I know there's a huge amount more to say, but I think the most relevant question for our participants up here, for Jillian, Megan, is why are you so awesome? I think we're gonna put that on their next evaluation sheet. Anyway, I want to thank them and all of you for coming out so early. Thanks a lot.